Okay, guys, welcome back. So, part two of the RPE article. So, picking up where we left off, we're looking at the variables impacting by selecting either a rep and reserve method or a percentage 1RM method. So, really, what we're doing is comparing auto-regulation to preset weights in a program and what the pros and cons are of that across different demographics. So, first, what we need to do is look at the accuracy. So for rep and reserve, a study showed that subjectively that the methods of reps remaining was at worst 93% accurate. So a lot of people will kind of think like, oh, how do you really know? My client doesn't know what they're doing, blah, blah, blah. So these were fairly untrained individuals and they were just told to stop at a certain point and say, how many reps do you have left? At worst, they were 93% accurate, and it also suggested that they got better over the day as they were testing this, which would indicate that the more you practice it, the more accurate you would actually be, maybe pushing that percentage up higher and higher for someone who implements this for their first meso, their first block of training, and just getting better and better at that kind of internal cues of feedback as to what's happening with them under the weight. 1RM, so predicting maximal strength. The biggest thing of accuracy here is going to be what we talked about in video one, where we need to plug all these guesstimates of what our 1RM is going to be into then, okay, what should we be able to do for 6 reps, for example. So it revealed the predictive 1RM model to be within around 3% accurate as well. So you can see they're pretty close. Maybe the percentage 1RM comes out a little bit on top in terms of accuracy, but this study itself was looking at using a formula to predict how much this person would lift to a one rep max, not going out the other way. Sometimes differences in athletes and how they're able to express strength in a 6 or an 8 versus in a single is very, very different. I know personally I have a huge gap even between a single rep and a double. So that needs to be considered as well. So 1RM testing is usually only realistically applicable for compound lifts. So you're not going to go and do a 1RM bicep curl. So we need to obviously use that formula where we're kind of testing, all right, how many could I do for 8? And then if we're going to select a weight for that, then we would do it for 12. Ever-changing skill and proficiency of a strength of a lifter is going to be a variable as well. So this was the one that led me towards using auto-regulation initially, was just that working with Gen Pop and novice strength athletes who were improving every week for a long period of time. So they'd come in, they'd squat, and then they'd squat again on Monday, they'd squat again on Wednesday, and they'd be stronger just because their skills improved, they're more confident, they're getting better at the spatial awareness and all those skill elements that come with lifting weights. So trying to predict like, well, their 1RM is X because their 1RM's now changed in 3 days, let alone 3 weeks and 3 months. So that was what led me to kind of looking at their ability to lift weights, or lift a particular weight. Next is auto-regulation. So this is, I guess, why most people will lean towards a rep and reserve method. It's a strategy for implementing auto-regulation. So RPE versus percentage 1RM loading was a paper. So there are resources at the end of this if you want to check it out, which discussed the argument around auto-regulation based training should actually, or could in theory, be better than the 1RM loading. When we're looking at the percentage 1RM, expressions of a reduction in training performance capacity while following a 1RM model will still be expressed. However, it's reliant on vague feedback. So when we have a rep and reserve method, we go into the gym and we go, okay, I want you to take this these sets of squats to a rep and reserve of 2. So every set that you do, I want you to have 2 reps left. So we get under the bar. Cool, last week I know I lifted 100 kilos for my squats. So this week, hopefully I'm a little bit stronger and I'm going for that still RIR of 2, the same as, let's say, for example, same as last week. We get under the bar, moving along. Maybe last night we had a shitty sleep. Getting to 80 kilos in our warm-ups, like, fuck, things aren't moving as good as I would normally like. Get to 90, oof, okay, I'm already at like, shit, maybe a rep in reserve of 4 or 5 here. Maybe I'll just go to 95 kilos and see how that feels. put 95 on the bar, do the set. Yeah, man, that's definitely rep and reserve of the two that we're looking for in this program. A lot of people at the moment are talking about like adapting training around menstrual cycles, adapting training around lots of different variables, but an auto-regulation method allows the athlete who typically most coaches, we aren't working with people who dedicate their entire lives training to training. So their meals aren't perfect all the time. Their sleep isn't perfect all the time. Even athletes tend to have ups and downs in those areas. So we're putting this in place to allow that we're taking this person to the level of fatigue that we want and getting the outcome that we need from the training session without digging them into a greater hole when their recovery has been compromised. In comparison, that's still going to show up in a percentage 1RM model. Maybe if you've got good communication with your client, you're able to say, hey, I want you to do 100 this week, but you've educated them that like you don't go getting on a weight that you don't feel very good. But you've got in your mind, this person should be able to squat, say 105 for the 6 reps we're aiming for. So they should be able to do 100 and be a little bit short, 2 reps in reserve. They should be a little bit short of maximum effort. And that's what I'm basing this program on and them getting that outcome. So they go into the gym, they do their 100 kilos, they're checking with their coach, like, fuck, that felt real hard today. That's your feedback to work off then. You've then got to watch the videos, interpret it yourself, and make a judgment call on what you're going to do the following week. And you're still looking into the same thing. So if you see a drop in performance with rep and reserve, then you're looking at sleep, nutrition, stress, all these external factors that may have influenced the drop in performance that week. You're going to do the same thing with the percentage rep and reserve. But it's kind of like, we'll try next week and maybe we'll go for 100 again and see how you feel. Or maybe we go for 95 and just back it off. But maybe they feel better that week. So the rep and reserve, in my opinion, obviously from an auto-regulation standpoint, because that's what it's designed to do, comes out a little bit superior in adapting week to week with lifestyle external stresses. So the considerations, just to summarize all of that, I guess. So auto-regulations allows a lifter to select a load based on their performance capacity of that day. So that's going to be affected by lifestyle, sleep, stress, menstrual cycle, etc. Training the lifter closer to failure than planned, and as a result, creating more fatigue than planned, could have impacts long term. So if we think about the SRA curve, so stress, recovery, adaptation, where we start at a certain level, we train, we actually detrain, and we decrease our ability to perform. We then go through the recovery phase and the adaptation phase. Now, if we drive this stress too far down, we don't have enough recovery capacity, we end up below our previous performance levels, and then we actually drop that again, and we come down even further, creating more issues down the track. So we're going to see things done. We're going to see more deloads. We're going to see less total working sets potentially done over a 12-week, 6-month, 12-month process. Special mention in here, just wanted to drop this one in, is about speed. So practice auto-regulation through assessment of bar speed has showed promise to be more effective than rep and reserve. Chosen to leave it out for a couple of reasons. To achieve the best results, the personal profile needs to be created for each lifter, the bar speed at different loads and different lifts. Going to be a nightmare for a coach until we have some tech that allows us to make that process a little bit more streamlined. At the moment, equipment's real expensive. You're talking sort of 1,000 to 2,000 Aussie dollars. To get one of those units, it's big, it's heavy, it's bulky, it needs to be calibrated. It's just not a convenient tool right now to apply. I have 100% faith that eventually there'll be just a thing you stick on the collar, and that gives us all the information, formulates everything that we need to achieve here. And eventually I think speed regulation will be where it's at. So skill and strength adaptations, we have mentioned this earlier in the presentation. So for rep and reserve, lifters change characteristics throughout a mesocycle. So what they were able to lift week 1 is not what they were able to lift on week 6, for example. So the 3 most notable things there are confidence, skill, and strength. They're going to be a moving target week to week, and we need to make adaptations for that and allow for it. And that's why we have that auto-regulation plugged into this side of things as well. For percentage 1RM, for accuracy, using this method would suggest to retest frequently. Testing is going to be fatiguing, taking things to obviously failure. It has a high range of fatigue, may influence total volume, etc. that we're able to do. So the considerations here, using an RRR method allows for a client to progress in load at the speed of their progression, not the load prescription. So if you're banking on, okay, I'm going to increase load by 2% every week over 6 weeks, and that should be fine. Whereas if you have an RIR method, maybe they're progressing really fast, they're getting really confident with the load on their back, the skill of the movement, all of these things are improving, they're building muscle, they're improving their diet, they're improving their sleep, they're improving their lifestyle factors. Maybe they're increasing their potential at 5% a week. So setting that rep and reserve target may give you an advantage to the rate at which you could progress. Obviously, a good coach who's looking at everything from a percentage standpoint would be reviewing that anyway and watching the videos and seeing what they think they can achieve. Typically, percentage loads are programmed with a predetermined weight, which increase week to week, and the coach will assess the performance and feedback and adjust if needed. So you can manage it both ways, just maybe a little bit easier to systemize and takes a little bit less input on a weekly basis to use the rep and reserve method. Lifter's personality. So the biggest drawback of the rep and reserve model is an individual's approach to training. So rep and reserve 9 might be an 11 with technique breakdown for the ego lifter, and a 6 might be it might be a 6 for someone who's a bit of an overthinker and wants that absolutely perfect rep every single time and won't accept any variable from that. So it's gonna be a little bit sometimes of a learning curve. Maybe you're telling white lies in your rep and reserve prescriptions, or maybe you're just being a bit of a hard ass, like, look, that's not a fucking RIR 9. Sort it out next week. Percentage 1RM, lift the weight prescribed. Lifters may still veer off course, but it's really obvious it's a clear deviation rather than a misinterpretation. Like, oh, I thought it was a 9 when it was an 11. Whereas if you were supposed to lift 100 kilos and you did 105 and you're like, oh, I just felt good today, coach. It's like, no, you went off program. It's much easier maybe to communicate that message. Feedback and education from the coach, sometimes telling white lies like I mentioned. Getting the prescription right, they're going to attempt to lift it. So giving someone a prescribed load that we talked about earlier, that person that maybe wasn't feeling great and came in and you'd prescribed 100 kilos, most people are going to chase that 100 kilos so they don't fail, they don't let down themselves or their coach or whatever it is, whoever they deem to be important. They're going to chase that number, and if that buries them from a fatigue standpoint, we're going to cause some dramas. So the summary of the comparisons of the two. Despite an openly biased lens from the coach who uses rep and reserve, there's clear benefits to a percentage method. Profound conclusion at this stage of discussion is there's clear advantage to using some style of method that measures and tracks the load a lifter is using. Anyone looking to achieve results by any means should be using a prescription method. So whether you're looking at rep and reserve or you're looking percentage training, these considerations need to be in your programming. Just writing, go and do 6x8 and not giving any other information other than that is a real fast track to either underperformance, under effort, and under outcomes, or overreaching with performance, resulting in injury, overtraining, too frequent deloads, inability to make progress. So there definitely needs to be a way to measure. How you measure it is up to you. You just need to make sure that you're considering all of these variables and making sure you're on top of them, talking to the client, educating the client on the way through.